Hello, welcome to Jason the Millennial. My name is Jason, speaking to you here in my parents' basement in the great state of Kansas. And in today's video live stream I'm doing, I wanted to start talking about TV shows on the channel. And an idea I had was to watch a season of a show or entirety of the show, all the seasons of the show, and with each season review that season and kind of talk about what happened that season, what I thought about that season, and kind of see how the show progresses or degresses, kind of give my overall thoughts on how the show went. And so I wanted to do shows that I'm already a fan of and I've seen and I know a lot about, but I also wanted to talk about shows I've never seen and kind of see them for the first time and give my thoughts for first time on shows. So these are shows that are already done and finished. I guess they're not ongoing shows. They're already had their finales and so forth. Anyway, so I thought it'd be interesting to kind of do a retrospective of these different TV shows. And I want to do shows from way back in the 50s to current shows. Anyways, is my idea for this. So I'm starting with this with the show Seinfeld. Um, and Seinfeld is a favorite show of mine. I grew up watching Seinfeld in the 90s when I was a kid and was a huge fan. And I probably started watching somewhere around the third, fourth season, I'm guessing, is when I really started watching the new episodes. And I remember because I used to, whatever night it came on, I remember being so excited. New Seinfeld episode coming out and sitting with my dad and I think my older sister, and we would watch the new Seinfeld show, and that was so fun to look forward to the next Seinfeld show. And yeah, so that's a big part of my childhood is watching Seinfeld, and yeah, this is definitely I'm a huge fan of the show. It's actually my favorite show of all time. It's so quotable. I quote the show all the time. I've seen all the episodes millions of times. I have all nine. I believe there's 9 seasons. I have all 9 seasons on DVD, so I have the complete show on DVD, which is great because they have a lot of great special features on them as well. So learned a lot about Seinfeld through that. I read a book one time called Seinfeldia or something like that. Book about Seinfeld. I've read before. I've read Michael Richards' autobiography recently that he came out with as well, and he talks about Seinfeld on there. So yeah, I'm definitely. I don't say I'm the biggest expert, but I feel like I'm pretty well versed in all Seinfeld things. So it's definitely a good show to start the series on and go through the Seinfeld episodes and the seasons, I should say, going through all the seasons and kind of give my thoughts on what I thought on the show itself and the seasons and kind of talk about the highlights and so forth of the show, anyways. And of course, just talk about how much I love the show as well. Anyways, and kind of talk about what happened on each season. It's kind of interesting to kind of see how the show went, how how it changes over time and all that anyway. So so of course this is the first episode, so we're talking about Seinfeld season 1, and I want to talk a little bit maybe about how the show started as well. I think it's very interesting. Obviously it's because of Jerry Seinfeld, who was a famous or was a pretty up and coming, really becoming really famous stand-up comedian. He really, what really put him over was being on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and he did a really great, stand-up routine and did very well, And the Tonight Show was like the place to do stand-up. That's where all the great stand-ups like did their routines and got really well known. And again, I don't know how well known Seinfeld was, but I think that definitely was a turning point in his career when he did that show. A lot of that is because it was on NBC, and so NBC execs saw how well he did on the show, I think, and saw like we this guy has something. He's very funny. He's very popular stand-up comedian. We can do some kind of show around this guy and have success, or we should try. And so they're really in on Jerry Seinfeld, the business of Jerry Seinfeld. So they called him up and said, "Hey, we want to be in business with you. We think we can make something special with you." uh, I don't think they knew exactly what they wanted. It was like we could do a sitcom, we can do a stand-up special, we can do a variety show, like, and it kind of basically like, what do you want to do? Whatever you want to do, we want to help you out because we think we can make something good here. And so this was, of course, great for Jerry. Like, wow, great opportunity. Of course, he decided to like try a sitcom, and but he really didn't know. And of course, they say, okay, you come up with an idea, a pitch of like what would be the overall idea of the sitcom, that we're working on. Like, there's a theme or whatever to it. And of course, he didn't really know what to do about that. Like, what kind of, what kind of premise should I make a sitcom out of? He wasn't really he was a stand-up comedy writer, but he wasn't really a TV writer necessarily. Though I think he did say he wrote for a TV show called Benson for a short period of time. And he got fired from as a writer, I think, on that show, or just kind of, yeah, just kind of let go. And I don't think anybody told him. I think he came to the meeting and they're like, "What are you doing here? You don't work here." And he's like, "Oh, I didn't know that," and so forth. So he didn't have a lot of experience in TV writing and all that, and wasn't sure what to do. So he was talking to his friend Larry David, who was another New York stand-up comedian, and they were kind of friends with. And he decided to pitch this idea to Larry David of like doing a sitcom and what it should be about, and kind of what if he has any ideas and so forth. Because Larry David actually did some writing, though nothing necessarily published. And Larry David, not only a stand-up comedian, he wrote for a kind of sketch comedy show called Fridays as well before this, and he wrote on Saturday Night Live for one season, for 1 year. So he had a little bit of writing experience on sketches and stuff like that. And he wrote like a screenplay that never got bought or anything. But I think Jerry saw that he is likes to write, plot lines and characters, and so he knows maybe, or he's a little bit better at that than Jerry was. So he decided to bring Larry on to come up with an idea of how do we do a sitcom and what should it be about and all this. And so they're just hanging out at the grocery store, at a restaurant, and they were just kind of, as stand comedians do, I think, when they're around each other, just kind of commenting. They're very observed. They like to do observation comedy, and just observe things that are happening and make fun of them, make jokes, make comedy bits, of course, and all this. And as they're doing that, Larry said, "This should be the show." And Jerry's like, "What do you mean this should be the show?" And he's like, "This is the show. People just hanging out, just real life, and all the funny things that happen to you in everyday life, And that's why we get the idea, or that's why it's known as the show about nothing. That's kind of the big thing that Seinfeld is called. And it's kind of funny to call it that, because each show has some kind of overall plot premise, character development. This show, on the other hand, it was like, no, characters don't develop. No one falls in love. Nobody gets married, has kids. They're just friends who are hanging out in New York, and we see their just everyday lives and the stuff that happened to them, and kind of come up with the observant, funny stuff. Anyway, so that was kind of like, okay, we can try that. And so the idea was like, why don't Jerry just play Jerry Seinfeld, a stand-up comedian? So he just kept his name Jerry Seinfeld, and of course the show's called Seinfeld, and he just played a stand-up comedian in New York. So that all kind of, again, Jerry Seinfeld is not an actor at this point. He's kind of getting into, he'll learn over time, like how to be, I think, a better comedic actor on screen. So this was kind of a new venture for him, other than stand-up comedy. So it was probably a good idea to just keep his name the same and just keep it simple for him, be a stand-up comedian in the show. Anyway, so that was kind of the idea. And I think even further, they kind of came up, I think they knew that that wasn't probably a good enough premise to get this show bought by, NBC or whatever. So he kind of came up with the idea that what if, as a stand-up comedian, we see stuff happen to him during the show, and then he does stand-up about the things that happen to him. So it's, the idea is that this is a stand-up comedian. We see how he gets his material. We see the things that happen to him, the things he observes in real life, and in the conversations he has, and how he turns that into stand-up comedy. And then Jerry will do stand-up comedy in the show, which is actually not a bad idea, I think, overall, and actually a very original idea, I think. Never seen a show where the main character does actual stand-up in the show. It kind of transitions from scene to scene by doing stand-up, or begins and ends the show with stand-up. So being that Jerry Seinfeld was a very well known stand-up and very good, and that was kind of his bread and butter, I can see that being a good premise that people would buy onto, and people might go, "Oh, this new show is Seinfeld with the comedian's Jerry Seinfeld, and Jerry Seinfeld does stand-up comedy in the show." I can see people going, "Oh, I'd like to watch that just to see him do stand-up comedy besides watching, a sitcom and the plot and all that. So that was probably a good selling point for him, of course, and got the show kind of bought, or NBC kind of was like, yeah, let's go with that. Sounds like a good idea. Of course, then Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld had to write the pilot, which they've never written a pilot before. So they got down and wrote a pilot for the show. So that gets us to and here's the thing, I guess, about this first season is there's only 5 episodes this season. So the first season is very, very short season. Kind of crazy. I've never seen a show with only 5 episodes, which is kind of insane. I know usually you have a show, you have a pilot, you do the pilot, if it gets picked up, you shoot the pilot, and then you kind of I guess you judge on how many people watch the show or how it was reviewed. I guess, I don't know, you kind of judge by that, by, okay, does this show have legs? Do we keep going? And then they order, if they think it does well or whatever, the ratings or whatever you want, whatever they measure that by, they then, say, all right, we'll give you 20 episodes or something like that. Like a full season back then was like 24 episodes, maybe 23 episodes, maybe more. And so that would be a full season they would, get you. This is weird that they're like, all right, give you a pilot, and after the pilot, they're like, we'll give you 4 more episodes to do, and then we'll kind of decide if we want to keep going, so it doesn't sound like the most confidence, I think. I would think as a writer, showrunner, it wouldn't give you the most confidence that they're only giving you 5 episodes or 4 more episodes after the pilot, which I think is kind of interesting. Yeah, so that's kind of how the show went. They wrote the pilot. The pilot is funny. It was called Seinfeld Chronicles. So it wasn't, again, of course, it's weird watching the first season because it definitely does not feel like Seinfeld fully. I mean, they got the ideas there for Seinfeld, I think, to show what's going to be, but they definitely were a lot of stuff they had to work on, and they I don't think exactly knew what they were doing at the time, and they didn't know exactly what to do with these characters, and how to write a show. And so it's kind of weird watching this first season because there's definitely a lot of changes here. A lot of things are going to be changing in the future. They're just really kind of getting the crust is that the word, of what the show is going to be. And kind of, it's a starting point, and not a great starting point in my opinion, but it's a starting point that will, in my opinion, grow into better seasons, I know, in the future, and they really will get the right kind of writers to really collaborate and come up with some of the funniest show episodes of all time, in my opinion. So that's coming up, but this first season, we're not there yet. They don't know exactly what they have yet with the show, and you can really tell in this first season. Like I said, first off, it's called Seinfeld Chronicles, not Seinfeld, in the pilot episode. And I guess I'll talk about the pilot episode here. They later call the pilot episode "Good News, Bad News" is the name of the episode. So we do establish Jerry Seinfeld and his best friend George Costanza, played by Jason Alexander. And what's interesting is George basically is in place of Larry David, because the whole idea, like I said, is Jerry and Larry just hanging out and making fun of things and having these conversations that kind of, develop into comedy bits or stand-up comedy and stuff. And so, but instead of Larry David, they have George Costanza here, kind of in that part as the best friend who they constantly are talking and hanging out and doing stuff together. But instead of making him a stand-up comedy, I think they probably thought at first to make him also a stand-up comedian, but they decided, we don't need more than one stand-up comedian. We need, other, a little more variety, I guess. So it's weird in the first season, George is a real estate agent. I don't think that lasts too long. We'll see when we get to the second season. I know that eventually will change and he'll get an office job, but like I said, I don't think they knew what to do with George exactly, except for real estate agent. It seemed like, enough of a variety of a job compared to stand-up comedy. But yeah, so that's how they came up with George as his best friend. And then one of the funniest character ideas I think they ever come up with and became one of the best characters is, of course, coming up with the Kramer character played by Michael Richards. I should say Jason Alexander was more of a Broadway like musical actor He was more known for his theater acting than anything else. He did do some pilots on some TV shows that never got picked up or didn't really go anywhere. So he was kind of an actor who was looking for, a sitcom and stuff like that. Um, and so when he auditioned for this, of course, he ended up being the perfect actor to play this character. And he obviously he's so good in the show, and it's a perfect combination or a perfect match for Jason Alexander playing this. He plays it absolutely perfect. It's kind of interesting though when you hear him talk about getting the show and how he didn't know exactly how to play George. And he didn't know that this was basically he's basically Larry David in the show. He's basically taking the part of Larry David in real life. And so he says deliberately that he played the character like Woody Allen. And when he auditioned, he did more of a Woody Allen impression. And so you do kind of get that he doesn't quite get the character. He's close though. He's very close. Doesn't quite get what the character is going to be because he doesn't realize, it's Larry David. So he's kind of doing it slightly different, not too different, but slightly different uh, comedic. I don't know. Way of doing things, I guess I don't know how to say. Like I said, he definitely tell he's doing more of a Woody Allen kind of thing and less of a Larry David thing anyway. So it's very interesting to see here. Anyways, yeah, so getting to Michael Richards. Like I said, I read Michael Richards' autobiography, which is very good, very interesting. He's definitely the oldest. I think he's like 10 years older than everybody else in the cast uh, by this point. And he was also a stand-up comedian in the 80s. And so he probably came across like Jerry and Larry during his days. I know he was like really good friends with Robin Williams and Billy Crystal and a lot of those other great Whoopi Goldberg, all those stand-up comedians of the 80s. And Jay Leno was another friend of his, I think, during that time period. And so he was kind of going around. To me, he was always more of a great sketch comedic actor. And obviously his physical comedic abilities are top notch. I mean, he's really a physical comedian. And so stand up's not always been his best thing because he has to use physical comedy while he's doing stand up. He's more of a physical than a verbal, though he's not terrible verbally, but definitely he was a different kind of stand up because he had to do a lot of physical bits in his stand up. And I think even in the book he says that he was never as comfortable as a stand-up. He was in like Weird Al Yankovic's UHF movie. He was in that, and he was in Child's Play as well. So he did have a couple movie parts at this point. And when Jay Leno took over the Tonight Show, he actually made a lot of appearances playing characters because he was friends with Jay Leno. So he was doing stuff here and there, and also he was on the show Fridays. I should also say he was one of the sketch comedic actors on that show, which I've never really seen any Fridays. I've just heard about it and seen clips here and there. Like I said, he worked with Larry David on that show. It wasn't nearly as popular or successful as like Saturday Night Live. It only lasted probably a couple years, maybe, I don't know, at most. It didn't last that long for him. Anyways, so it was definitely ripe for this kind of role, a sitcom type role. And it was interesting reading about his, how he got the part. He went auditioned and he kind of did this character and he kind of just improvised in the room and just did a lot of crazy, funny physical stuff. And he ended his audition by standing on his head and then got up and left. And one of the producers said, well, if you want funny, we hire that guy. And so that was a good indication of like, yeah, they all knew, I think, right away, we have to get Michael Richards for this character. Kramer character is a very interesting character because it's based off of a friend of Larry David's. I think maybe he was another stand-up comedian. I can't remember, but a guy named I think his name's like Kenny Kramer or something like that. And so his last name was Kramer, and he lived in the apartment next to Larry David, or lived in that area, lived in that space, and they hung out a lot and did a lot of stuff together. And he kind of saw him as a good character because he was kind of this guy who seemed like he mooches off other people or something like that, or seemed like he never really had a job, but yet somehow he had enough money to have an apartment. And so there's almost kind of this mystery about him. And I don't know. So they took kind of the idea of this guy, that named Kramer that Larry David knew, and they made this character kind of as the next door neighbor who's very quirky, I guess you can say. Um, but they weren't sure if they wanted to name him Kramer because they're afraid if they name Kramer, they would get sued by the real guy named Kramer. So in this first episode, they call him Kessler. It's the only episode where they don't call him Kramer, they call him Kessler, and I think it's not mentioned a whole lot. But again, because they just didn't want to either get sued or him try to make money off of the show, whatever. But then after the pilot episode, they went back and said, "Man, Kramer's such a great name. We got to name him Kramer." And so I think they made a deal with the real Kramer, who I think said he wanted to play Kramer, and they said, "No, you can't play Kramer. We got Michael Richards." But they worked some kind of deal. I suppose they gave him money or something like that to use the Kramer name, and so he wouldn't sue them and all that. So it was kind of a funny story itself, and it will play out. All these things will play out in the show, which is funny. Very meta stuff later on in the show. So that was kind of the basics of the pilot episode, is having Jerry, George, and Kramer, or Kessler at the time, as next door neighbor. Anyway, so there's no Elaine. There's no Julia Louis-Dreyfus. There's no Elaine. They did not write a female part. The only thing they did write was a female waitress. They have one scene, and it's funny because it's so different, because it's not the setup of Monk's Cafe. They're not in Monk's Cafe in the first episode, which they'll be for the rest of the show. They were in some different, and they had a waitress and had one scene, and the idea was that she would be a recurring female character, I guess, as a waitress, because they keep going to this diner or whatever, and she'd be kind of a part of it, as kind of this grouchy waitress, I guess. So that was really odd to see, like, this waitress coming in and having this scene, and then of course she'll never be a thing again for the show. But and it's weird not seeing Elaine, because Elaine is definitely a big part of the show, and is a must for the show to be so great. And I'll talk about that once I get to Julia Louis-Dreyfus getting hired. But anyways, so for the pilot episode, no Elaine, no Julia Louis-Dreyfus, no Monk's Cafe. We got Kessler. Not only do we have Kessler, but Kessler has a dog, or has, I think, maybe two dogs in this episode. We have one scene where he comes over in like a bathrobe, and he's looking for meat. He has bread, but he needs meat. So he said, "Do you have any meat?" Because he wants to make a sandwich. And his dogs come over, and of course, never again will we see the dogs ever again. And it was like, I guess, a decision that Jerry was going to do a stand-up bit about dogs, but he never did, or something like that. So it wasn't needed anyway. So it's a little weird seeing Kessler with dogs, and then we'll never see those dogs again. Again, they're just really doing things, trying things out that they eventually decide won't work. Even George, he wears like a baseball cap in this episode, and I don't think you really ever see him. Every once in a while, maybe, but he doesn't really wear baseball caps too often in the future. So he's definitely a little different. Like I said, he's a real estate agent talking about real estate. Yeah, it's all a little off for me as someone who's, a big fan of the show and knows all the episodes. So it's a little weird coming back to this first episode and wow, where the show will go from when it began. Again, they have some of the crust of, again, I'm not saying that word right, of what the show, I guess, is going to be, which is people talking about mundane things, observing things in life. And I think one of the funny things about the show, what they'll develop, which I think is so great about the show, is developing these unwritten rules that we live by in society when it comes to social situations, and how there's no real rule, but yet there's an unwritten rule that they all know. And so when they get into situations, they go, okay, what do I do in this situation? And someone will go, well, the rule is this, even though it's an unwritten rule, but yet they all act like they have to live by these rules. And it's funny because that's how real life works. We all live by these unwritten rules that we put upon ourselves in social situations, that we decide this is acceptable and this is not acceptable in this situation. And also, how men and women work, and how relationships work and all that. Anyway, so we do get that in this first episode, which is all about Jerry. A girl is coming in town, and I think he maybe knows her, and he likes her, and he wants her to stay at his place, and so she accepts to stay at his place while she's in town, or something like that. I say in town, in New York. But yeah, he doesn't know, is this she just a friend, or is it more? Is it a romantic, possible romantic relationship? And so he doesn't know what to do. Should he offer her? I think because he ends up offering her like a mattress or something, some kind of mattress or bed to sleep on, so she doesn't sleep in the bed with him. And because he's discussing, should I, even Kramer slash Kessler or whatever says, why give her the option, uh, basically saying like, just let her sleep in the bed with you, whatever. So he's kind of deciding what to do. How do I know if this is just friendly, if it's a real relationship, and all this? And so George comes up with these like unwritten rules about, well, when you meet her at the airport, if she does this, that means it's maybe a romantic relationship. If she does this, though, it means you're just friends. So that's why, and they call it signals. So the signals, and that's a big part of the show. Is, and again, that's what makes the show kind of what's going to be, this unwritten rule about what kind of signals do women give and how do you read them. uh, Not a terrible concept overall. I don't think it's necessarily the funniest thing about Seinfeld. I mean, it's something there, but it's definitely a weak episode overall compared to what we're going to get. Also, I should say the episode begins on him and George and Jerry, I think in the diner, and he starts discussing about the button on George and how uh, about, and again, it's just this mundane talk, which again, that's what makes Seinfeld so good. It's about nothing. It has nothing to do with the show, but yet they're just discussing about where to button the shirt, and that, see that button, it's no man's land or something like that. Do you top the top button, the second, I don't know. So they have this whole discussion on buttons and that. And again, it's not the funniest conversation ever, but yet I think it is a core of what Seinfeld is about. Just coming up with these mundane observations in life, as stand-up comedians do. And of course, like I said, throughout this, of course, episode or through the series, especially the first episode, I feel like there's a lot of stand-up. They definitely are really trying to rely on the stand-up material to kind of carry the show, I think. That's why they have so much stand-up material. And it's not bad. Jerry Seinfeld is definitely a great stand-up comedian. It's one of my favorite of all time. Overall, it's not bad. I won't talk about the stand-up itself. It'd be too much stuff to talk about. But it's interesting to see his different stand-up stuff and some classic stuff as well, in some of these stand-ups anyways. But yeah, so in this first episode, um, she comes and then she like holds his hands and like jumps up and down, and he's looking at George like, what's that signal? And George goes, I don't know. He wasn't expecting her to do that, so he doesn't know what to do. Anyways, then you find out that she has like a fiance, and so it definitely was not a romantic relationship. Anyway, so that's the whole first episode of the show, the pilot episode. Again, not necessarily a great episode. It's definitely compared. Again, it's hard because I know what's coming up later in the show. Definitely a very weak episode, but again, it's a pilot episode. You're not always going to have your best episode be the first one, of course. That's never going to happen. It's usually going to be one of your weaker shows, episodes, anyways. Of course, not having Elaine in there kind of hurts it, and not quite having Kramer in there as well, and or as much, or his character kind of really developed yet. In fact, they kind of refer to him as I can't remember if it was this episode or another episode. Jerry says something like Kramer hasn't left the building in 10 years. So one of the ideas was that Kramer was agoraphobe, I think it's called, where he's afraid to leave the building and that he just only lives in his apartment. I suppose that's why he has the bathrobe on in that first episode. Uh, Look, I'm glad they kind of did away with that and they had him, because the show gets so much funnier when Kramer is involved and he's outside. And of course, one of the big things is he has so many different friends, and you get all these great other characters like Newman and so forth. Anyway, so the show definitely gets much better once Kramer leaves the apartment. In fact, we have some episodes where he's not even in the show because they leave the apartment and they decide Kramer doesn't leave the apartment, like the Chinese restaurant that we get in the second season, and like the pen. I think also in the third season, maybe we get the pen or whatever, where they go visit Jerry's parents. And so it's weird. I never like it when you don't have. I think that when they decide that they need those four core people, that's the show. The show is Jerry, George, Kramer, and Elaine. You have to have those four people involved. In fact, once they decide that all four need their own storylines within the show and they all kind of intertwine, that's what makes the show magical. Of course, they did not understand that yet at this point. or develop enough at this point because they're just brand new sitcom writers, and Jerry and Larry David are the showrunners basically and the creators of the show at this point. So the show doesn't do, I don't think, great episode. It does, I guess, well enough that they decided to give him four more. I said, we'll give you four more episodes to write and see how it goes from there, basically. So, and it's an interesting thing is that the pilot episode came out in 1989. So that's when and I was about 6 years old when the show came out. So obviously, like I said, I didn't watch the show when it first started. It was a couple of years in before I really started getting into it. So I was not aware of all this when it happened and all that. But yeah, it started in 1989, but it actually was like a year later when they would do the next four episodes. So there's actually quite a bit of time between the pilot episode and when they kind of really officially started the season, and did the rest. Of course, one of the big changes, one of the big notes from the executives was we need a female character, like a main female character, to be involved in the show, which is a great note, I think, from the producers. And of course, and Jerry Larry like, yeah, that's a good idea. Like, why didn't we think of that? And maybe just because they were guys and they don't think about putting a female in there, maybe, or anyways, that didn't cross them, but it was a good note, and they took it and they said, all right, let's develop a female character. And Larry basically came up with the idea that he had a girlfriend once. After they broke up, they still became friends and they still hung out as friends. And so he said, what if we had a female like that used to date Jerry, and they've broken up, but yet they don't hate each other. They're still actually really good friends and hang out and do stuff together and all that. And so that's where they come up with the idea of this Elaine character. Of course, here comes Julie Louis-Dreyfus, who isn't a well-known actress at all. Hasn't really done much. She started off, I think, in like she was in a sketch comedy group. Is where she kind of first started with her husband and some other guys, and they got all hired onto Saturday Night Live in the around 86, 87 seasons. The whole group was hired because they needed new people. And so Julia Louis-Dreyfus went right into Saturday Night Live, and she was like in her early 20s at this point. She's definitely the youngest in the group. So she gets onto Saturday Night Live, but she really doesn't know how to write sketch comedy or to promote herself into like a leading role. So she never really did much. She was only in for a couple of years probably in Saturday Night Live, and yet she didn't really do anything memorable. Like no one can really remember it. In fact, it's easy to forget that she was on Saturday Night Live because she's not really talked about or shown clips of when you talk about the great hits of Saturday Night Live or great characters or great, performers. And it's not because she wasn't, obviously, she's very talented, she's very funny, but it just didn't fit her, I guess, or she didn't know how to fit into the show. Of course, when she was there, it was Larry David's one season that he had with the show. And of course, Larry David famously only had like one sketch ever make it on air, and it was like a sketch at the very end of the show. So his sketches weren't making it, and that's why he kind of basically quit the show because it was like none of the sketches were getting on. Of course, so he says when they were auditioning for the Lane character, of course, and Julie Louis-Dreyfus came in. Of course, he really liked Julie Louis-Dreyfus. He says that he remembers he thought she was really good on Saturday Night Live and that she was good at taking direction from him, and they seemed to do very well together. So I think that really helped her because her kind of somewhat relationship with Larry, just like Larry had kind of relationship with Michael Richards from Friday. So kind of interesting how they all kind of interconnected and how they kind of came together. So that's how they got Julia Louis-Dreyfus on there. And what a great pick. I mean, Julia Louis-Dreyfus goes on to become probably the greatest female comedic actress of all time. Not only does she win, I know, an Emmy at some point here on Seinfeld, she'll go on to New Adventures of Old Christine and win an Emmy on there. And then she'll go on Veep and win like 3 or 4 in a row. So, I mean, she's won tons of Emmys in her career. And has proven herself as just one of the greats. So yeah, really great pick in Julia Louis-Dreyfus in here. And yeah, I think Elaine is I wouldn't say it's my favorite character, but definitely adds to the group, I think. And again, just those four core are so good together. The chemistry is so good. They're so funny. So yeah, really great way of putting her in. And she has some physical comedic about her too. She has some physical comedy, and it's good to have a female perspective on the show. I think really helps as well. The only problem I would say of the Lane character, I think, is that I think the producers wanted a female character because most sitcoms, you have the main, characters usually fall in love and get married and all this. So I'm sure they thought, I mean, because relationships in TV sitcoms or even dramas or whatever is definitely a core part of most shows, and people want to see that. People want to see fall in love. I mean, if you watch Friends, Ross and Rachel are going to get together, and even other characters are going to get together and have, get married and have kids and all that. The Office, same thing. I mean, Jim and Pam's relationship is a really big part of that show and what makes that show so great. So I would say I do love that about shows when you have a good romance going on, which happens almost in every sitcom you ever see. There's usually some kind of, unless they're already married. Sometimes you have Everybody Loves Raymond or something. But I do like a sitcom where you have characters fall in love and they kind of develop that relationship and all that. Um, and so I'm sure that's what they were thinking when they had the Lane character come in, is that because they already established that they used to date, and we'll see that in second. And I'll talk more about that in the second season because we're going to see that definitely of them trying to push that relationship with Jerry and Lane. Still, there's an awkwardness between them because you definitely can tell that that was the idea I think behind the two characters, that they eventually will get back together, and people will want to see that, see the relationship get back together. Especially in the second season, they like I said, they really pushed that. So that's what their idea is. But luckily, that didn't pan out because I think that's what makes Seinfeld so unique and different than any other sitcom, is that they don't fall in love and get married. Elaine and Jerry, they don't ever date again, really, except for like I said, there's like one. We'll get that in season 2. There's like one episode where they date again, and luckily they kind of just went away from that because that's what makes the show I think so good and what they wanted the show. Like I said, they said there's uh, yeah, there's none of that. There's no seriousness. And I think that's what I love about Seinfeld because even any sitcom maybe you can pick out, there's always serious moments. It's mostly funny, but then like I said, you have the relationship parts. There's always going to be a serious conflict of will they, won't they? They're fighting, they break up, they eventually get back together. That's part of developing a good show is having that conflict, and that's what they like to do. Besides other things like someone might die or there's always to do conflict, and so you usually get some serious moments. Seinfeld, there's never a serious moment in Seinfeld, which I absolutely love. That I can watch any Seinfeld episode and know that I'm never going to have to deal with any kind of drama. That it's just going to be pure comedy. That all we're going to do is try to be the funniest thing ever and not be serious. And I don't know, I kind of love that about Seinfeld because it's different. I don't mind it when a sitcom is serious sometimes and has relationship stuff, but yet I kind of love this idea that we're not gonna have any serious relationships, really, and no one's gonna have a baby and all this. We're just gonna be the same. We're gonna be four New Yorkers in the dating world, going through breakups and having funny girlfriends and boyfriends that are unique and quirky and only last one episode, and then each episode you have a different boyfriend or girlfriend a lot of times, and that's the way the show is going to be. And I really like that anyway, so I guess that's just my whole spiel on the Lane character. Interesting enough, the Lane character actually is introduced in the next show that they actually do is the fourth episode, Mel Unbonding. Though the Mel and Bonding show actually ends up on the DVD. It's fourth, and if you look it up in season 1, it's the fourth episode. It was actually the second episode they shot. So it was the first episode they shot after doing the pilot, and it's the first time we see actually Lane with Jerry. And the very first scene they do together is them in Jerry's apartment, and we kind of just get them talking about, oh, let's go out to eat. And she said, I'm not really hungry, and I don't really, where do you want to go? I don't know, I don't really want to go or something like that, but we should go somewhere. And she said, I'll go if I don't have to do anything or something like that. So it's kind of a funny conversation that they have, and that kind of develops their chemistry, I think, very well. And you kind of get that they used to date, but now they're friends kind of vibe. So it was a good first kind of scene for those two, though we don't really see it until the fourth season now. And instead, the second episode that we do get is called The Stakeout, which I think is a much better episode than the first one. I think it's definitely a step up in the idea of what they're doing. A couple notable things I want to talk about. Of course, the big plot premise of this episode is that Jerry sees a girl, but he doesn't have her number or doesn't know her name or something like that. And so, but he knows where she works, so he has George hang out with him at the place and act like they just bump into her. This whole idea. And then once he gets like her name and whatever, then he doesn't need George anymore. He just doesn't want to seem like a stalker. So he bumps into her, and then they start dating. And one of the most notable things, a couple notable things about this episode, one is the first time George comes up with his alter ego, Art Vandelay. He's coming up with it. He's like, he doesn't want to be George. When he meets someone new that doesn't know him, he doesn't want to be George Costanza, the real estate, whatever. He wants to be something more interesting. So he comes up with Art Vandelay. And this is great because this name will come back and forth throughout. It's one of the, I don't know if it's a funny name, but it's funny how that name keeps coming back, how he keeps coming back to doing this alter ego kind of Art Vandelay. And he always wants to be an architect. That's the big thing. Art Vandelay, an architect, or sometimes he's an importer exporter. And I don't know why he comes with those, but he always wanted to. And one of my favorite lines is like, I always wanted to pretend that I was an architect. Not my dream was to be an architect. What do you think would be, the right way to say that? You should dream to be an architect, but no, he didn't dream to be an architect. He always dreamed to pretend to be an architect, basically to lie. Like it's his fantasy is to lie about being an architect, and making people think he's like a bigger deal than he really is. So, and that really captures the George character so much, that he lies all the time to make himself look better and all this stuff, and gets him in trouble, and that's a big part of this character. But anyway, so we get Art Vandelay here, which is very funny. And so this officially is the first time we're going to see the Lane character, I guess, and Julia Louis-Dreyfus in this episode. We also get Jerry's parents, which I didn't realize we get Jerry's parents so early in the show. But they're staying over, and they're sleeping at his place. And I guess he only has one bed, so he has to sleep at Kramer's place. And so we do get a scene where he walks in, and his parents are laying in the fold-out bed, the couch bed. And we do get Liz Sheridan, who plays his mom, Helen, who will play Helen for the rest of the series. And interesting, his father, Marty, is played by an actor named Phil Bruns. And this is the only episode where he plays his father. They will get a different actor after this season. They do get a different actor to play Marty Seinfeld. So, which is the one I always am associated with as Jerry's dad. So it's very weird to see this episode again. It's so weird watching this season because it just seems off a little bit on all all these characters, because we get this Phil Bruns playing, and it just doesn't feel right because I'm used to the other actor, and he doesn't really do anything special here. And I don't know if they just didn't think he fit the character right, and that's why they changed him. And Larry David wanted to go back and redo the episode with the new dad, but they decided that it'd be too much, I think, effort to go back to that first season and try to. So they do that with another character. We'll talk about later on another season. Interesting enough, in fact, there's twice that's kind of happened in the show where they kind of changed the character, went back and kind of redid the episode in a way with a different actor playing the part. But yeah, so we do get his parents here as well in this episode. The third episode, we got the robbery. Again, I'm just going to talk about each episode because there's only 5. I think in most seasons, I'm just going to highlight my favorite episodes more likely and all that. But here, I'm kind of just going through each episode. Episode 3, the robbery. This is where Jerry's apartment gets robbed because he was away and Kramer didn't lock the door and someone came in and stole some stuff. And so they're talking about him moving to a different location because it's, I guess, too dangerous because he got robbed there or whatever. This really plays into George, who's a real estate agent who helps him get another apartment. I have a commenter. Hello, hello. Thanks for joining in. Are you a Seinfeld? Do you love Seinfeld as much as I do? Talking about the first season of Seinfeld. Um, yeah, so Jerry's looking for another. Of course, George is real estate agent, so he finds an apartment for him. But the only problem is he likes the apartment so much. They kind of show the apartment, and he's like, wow, it has he didn't he's like, I didn't realize it would look like this or something. And he's like, wow, it's a great price. And now he's kind of jealous of Jerry, so now Jerry feels bad to take the apartment because he's like, well, now we're gonna have an awkwardness in our relationship because you want this apartment. And so, but then George's like, no, you take it. And so, but there's obviously some, like, resentment there. So that's kind of the basis of there's a good part where they're looking at the apartment, and Elaine goes into the closet or something like that, and Jerry like shuts the door on her, and then he opens it and she's pretty upset. It's kind of a funny scene. um this was actually one of the better episodes in the season. Like I said, there's not many, so there's not much to talk about. um but I do like that scene where they're showing the apartment. Also, Elaine wants to take Jerry's apartment because she wants to get away from her roommate, and she would love to have that apartment that Jerry has. So this is, I think, plot wise, maybe I think this may be one of the better plots of this first season, I guess, where we see like multiple, characters wanting different things and multiple conflicts, and not much Kramer in this one. I don't believe. No, well, there is at his apartment at the beginning. Actually, my favorite quote I wrote down here. My favorite quote, and I think the funniest part of this episode is, Kramer, of course, is sorry. He's like, I'm sorry, I messed up, and Jerry talks about, I spent all this money on this lock. And this is the quote. He says, it's the most impenetrable lock on the market today, but it has one design flaw. The door must be closed. I think that's actually a really funny line, just really sticking it to, Kramer for messing up. And, well, I guess I screwed up or something like that, he says. And all that. Um, uh, I did want to mention that this is, let's see. Yeah, this is the first time Kramer did his sliding entrance in this third episode, which he will keep as his trademark for the rest of the show. And what Michael Richards says is that it was his cue to come in, but he was a little late on the cue. I realized, oh, I need to come in. So he came in real fast. He opened the door real fast, and he kind of slid in because he had kind of these slick shoes, I guess. And it got a laugh out of the audience how he kind of made his entrance. And of course, he noted that. And since then, every time, in fact, you'll see this a lot in future episodes because they have an audience there, that each time Kramer slides in, it gets a huge laugh. Kramer, of course, becomes such a favorite, definitely a favorite of the show, to a point where they had to tell everybody, stop, don't laugh when he comes in because it throws off the comedic timing. And a lot of times he has to slide in, and then they laugh, and he has to wait for the laughter to die down before they can keep going on the scene. So it kind of somewhat ruins everything, but yeah, it shows how much they love the Kramer character and how much that sliding in was such a brilliant, kind of accident by Michael Richards. So yeah, we get that in this episode as well. It's also the first episode we see Monk's Cafe, which will be a big part of the show, where everybody, it's like mostly you're in Jerry's apartment or you're at Monk's Cafe a lot of times. Those kind of your two big sets that you're going to be in. And yeah, Monk's Cafe becomes a big part of the show. Every episode, pretty much, they all usually get in a booth, sometimes a table, but usually they're in a booth, and they have, really funny conversations anyway. So yeah, we get that in this episode as well. Also, I wanted to say Larry David actually got promoted to executive producer after this because he made a lot of decisions that did very well. And so they said, we're promoting you to executive producer, which shows how naturally good Larry David was as a comedic writer, of course, because he wrote pretty much, I think he wrote 4 of the episodes in this season. He was definitely the writer of the show. Jerry didn't write so much as he just looked over the script, I think, and he approved it or didn't approve it and stuff like that. But Larry's definitely the main writer to really kind of set the tone of the show and what the show's going to be and all that. So yeah, so I know he talks about how he made some decisions, and someone said, we're giving the executive producer, because he was just really good at seeing something and kind of coming up with like, okay, this is a funny line, or you say it this way, it's funny, maybe say it this way. And that's what Larry David gets really good at, is kind of, coming up with ideas on how to make the show funnier anyways. And we get that in this episode. Um, as I mentioned, the Mill Unbonding, episode 4, is actually the second episode they actually shot with, the first one with Julia Louis-Dreyfus. This is probably my least favorite episode of all time. I absolutely hate this episode. I can't watch it when it's on. If it's on rerun, like, I do not watch this episode. Um, and I'll go and why. But this episode, Mill and Bonding, is all about Jerry has a friend played by Kevin Dunn. Kevin Dunn's such a funny actor. I know him from Veep. He's very funny on Veep. He was in Transformers. He played Shia LaBeouf's dad in that, and he's very funny in the Transformers movies. And he's in a bunch of stuff. He's a really funny, like, kind of character actor that you've seen somewhere. And so it's cool to get Kevin Dunn here in this episode, but I hate that character so much. And it's a one-time character that they bring in. He's a guy that was a friend of Jerry's when they were kids, and he still clings on to being friends with Jerry, though Jerry doesn't like him or want to be friends with him. But, what do you do when someone wants to hang out? He didn't want to, say no, so they hang out, and he's a horrible human being. I hate, there's one of the first scenes, he orders something from the waitress, but then he really is a jerk. He's just a huge jerk to this waitress. And a part of it is just Jerry seeing this and going, how am I hanging out with this guy? He's such a jerk. I hate the character. He's such a jerk. He's not funny, though. It's not like a funny jerk. He's just a real not funny jerk. And all the conversations he has with Jerry is just not funny, and he's not funny in it. And it's just a horrible character that really brings the show down, in my opinion, or this episode down overall. He even hits on Lane and tries to, like, ask Lane out, but Lane doesn't really want to go out with him, so he comes off like very sleazy. I don't know. He's just, every scene he's in is just terrible and just ruins the whole episode. And why I hate it so much is because that character is so terrible and unlikable anyway. So yeah, Mill and Bonnie, I really hate this episode. Definitely my least favorite of this first season. I'm gonna say right now, it's definitely the opposite of highlight, I guess. The low light of this episode, or the season, is the show Mill and Bonnie. I think is absolutely terrible. But we do get some Kramer. We get the first mention of Kramerica in Industries, where he wants to, make a company where he invents things. And one of his first ideas is a pizza restaurant where you make your own pizza. This actually will come in fruition later in a different episode later on in the show, but it's funny to see it here that he's already coming up with these ideas, and Kramerica will be a very funny idea in a lot of episodes where he comes up with these inventions that don't work anyways. And it's funny, he doesn't have a job, but he has these ideas that he thinks he can make money off of, and that's what makes the character so funny as well. But yeah, that's all I gotta say about that episode. And then the 5th episode, the stock tip, another episode that's just really boring, not very memorable. Like, it's one of those where I get to, I'm like, I don't remember this episode at all. It's one of the least known ones, I feel like, that I think I never see on reruns because nobody cares about it. But because it's just about Jerry and George buy stock, but the guy that they bought it, or they got the idea of buying it from, is in the hospital, so they don't know when to sell it. So they're worried about should they sell the stock, should they not sell the stock, and that's the whole episode. So it's very weak, I think, plot wise and all that. The only interesting thing I have on here is that the girlfriend that he had that he meets in the stakeout, Vanessa, comes back in this episode, which is very rare. Usually it ends with the girlfriend breaking up with Jerry or George or whatever, and then they have a different girlfriend by the next episode. So it is weird to see a previous girlfriend kind of come back into this episode. Anyway, so very weak. Obviously, I don't think they realize how do you make a season finale, and it's hard to even call it a season finale. It's only 5 episodes, so they just kind of came up with the best ideas they had, I guess. Larry David did, and at this point, and I know they had other, like Larry Charles. I don't know if Larry Charles is writing this point, but they would eventually get, like, Larry Charles, who's a good comic writer, and I think another guy, Melman, is a good comic writer, and Carol, I forget her name, is also Leifer. I think Carol Leifer. They did get some decent writers. Not this season, maybe the next season they'll get some better writers to help Larry David out, because I don't think Larry David on his own knows exactly how to make a good show. Though he does have good ideas, and we will see some of his best ideas come out and make some great episodes as well in the future. But again, not this season. The season definitely, it's a hard season to watch. It's very weak. There's really no great episodes here that are going to make it into my favorite episodes, to be honest, and not really too memorable overall. It's almost a season you can almost skip, I would say. And I don't know, maybe a Seinfeld purist like me should say you have to watch every episode. They're all great, but I'm here to say not every episode, not every season is great. To start out, once we get cooking, it becomes the greatest show of all time. At this point, it's not the greatest show of all time, unfortunately. So, if you if unless you really want to go through every episode of Seinfeld, I would say skip this season overall. And we'll talk about what I think about the second season on another episode or on this channel. But anyways, so I wanted to give like a ranking. Since there's only 5 episodes, I can rank all 5 episodes on this season. For me, number 5, again, Melon Bonding. I absolutely hate that episode. Number 4, I got Good News, Bad News. The pilot, very weak overall, and it's just so different because there's no Elaine. We have Kessler stuff, Kramer. It's just not there yet. Number 3, the stock tip. Again, I think it's just a very boring, unmemorable episode. The top 2 are definitely the best 2, I think, this season that aren't great, but has some, at least some memorable scenes in it, I think. And some, I laughed a little more in these, in that. And I put number 2, I put the stakeout, the second episode. I think, again, I love seeing the Art Vandelay, character come out. And we see the parents, we see Julie Louis-Dreyfus and as Elaine. So there's some really good stuff there. And then number 1, I put the robbery, because I think the robbery overall is the best written episode with the best plot overall, and where there's actually a good, decent beginning, middle, and end to the episode overall. I said not super funny, but has a couple funny moments here in there, anyways. But yeah, still nothing spectacular in this season. Also, I wanted to give an MVP for the season, which is hard because there's only 5 episodes. And I went with George Costanza, or Jason Alexander as George Costanza as the MVP of the season, which is weird because usually I'm probably going to give it Kramer or Michael Richards in the future because he's always been my favorite. But I don't think they still knew what to do with that character yet at this point. And he does get some scenes here and there, but he's not quite Kramer yet. Jerry, again, he's not really developed as an actor yet either, and he'll get better. And Julia Dreyfus Elaine, of course, only did 4 episodes and wasn't in the pilot, so she hasn't really developed yet either. I think George is maybe the best developed character so far in this first season. We get to Art Vandelay, like I said, him wanting to pretend to be an architect. So we get how he really loves to lie, and that's a big part of his character, and it's very funny anyways. I do want to mention that it did get an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Editing for the episode Stakeout. So I'm surprised I didn't think it'd get anything, but it did get 1 Emmy nomination on this. Anyways, overall, and I'm going to give a score, kind of what they call that, tier score of the season, with, S tier being like greatest of all time, A tier being very good, B tier, C tier, and F tier. I think I'm just going to do without a D tier and just go from A, B, C, F. And so I'm giving this an F tier season. It is not a good season. It's nothing very memorable coming of the season. Only 5 episodes, so it's hard to even call it a season. It's a very weird season of Seinfeld. And it's so strange that the show would go on to be the great show of all time, in my opinion. When this first season comes out, I can't believe they renewed it at all. I was thinking if I was watching the show in 1989, I would watch it and go, yeah, this show's not really that funny. Like some of the characters have potential, maybe, I guess, but I think I would go, yeah, I don't think we should renew the season, or I would be like, I don't think I'm gonna watch the show anymore. I just don't think it's not that funny or something like that. And I'd be way wrong, because obviously I'm so happy that they gave it a second season and then another season, and then they started cooking and started coming up with some of the greatest stuff ever. It just took a couple of years, I think, for them to get to how great they can be. So yeah, so I'm giving F tier, which is very harsh, but it's just true. It's just not a good season for Seinfeld and what it's going to be. Yeah, as anyway, so that's my opinion on this season. Hopefully you enjoyed coming down memory lane with me on the show. Either you learned something about Seinfeld you didn't know, or you knew some of this stuff maybe already, and hopefully you can discuss it in the comments what you thought about the season. I know one big Seinfeld fan, Sam, American Sam, big Seinfeld fan. I hope you're watching this at some point. Uh, give me your thoughts as well, because you're very knowledgeable on Seinfeld and love the show. So again, you might tell me I'm too harsh on this season, but again, the show is going to get better, obviously. But yeah, so hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully you'll enjoy the me going through the Seinfeld episode or seasons and kind of discussing more on the show. Anyways, I had a blast talking about it. I love talking about Seinfeld. Like I said, it's my favorite show of all time. Anyway, so besides that, comment what you think about this. What's your favorite episode, maybe, if you have one, or if you have any thoughts on the season or the show itself, definitely comment. But thank you so much for watching this. Anybody who's watching this after the fact, and please comment about if you're a Seinfeld fan as well, and all that. And besides that, thank you for anybody liking this video. All my subscribers, I'm so thankful for you, and for your loyalty to the channel, I guess. Anyways, besides that, have a great rest of the weekend that we're getting into, and I will talk to you later.